Thank you so much for joining today. I am Russell Daniels, the Digital Communications Manager for Open Primaries. We're so excited to be hosting this call with the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, NANR. And I just wanted to give everyone a quick heads up before we start. During the mini presentations today, I will be sharing in the chat feature some links to the various organization websites or relevant op-eds being discussed. Please don't feel like you have to click and read everything while the presentations are happening, because everyone on today's call will be getting a big email with all the resources discussed. And at this point, I'm going to turn things over to NANR's Mindy Finn. Mindy, are you on the call? Are you with us?
I am. I'm right here. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
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 Afternoon.
Hello. Lots of voices. I'm Mindy Finn. I'm the CEO of Citizen Data, which is a data analytics venture supporting the democracy reform field. I'm also a board member at the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. And I really just want to welcome everyone to this quarterly Spotlight Zoom call. These spotlights are designed to highlight issues and organizations within the growing political reform movement. And this time around, we're taking a look at efforts to restructure primary elections so that all voters can participate. Our hosts today are Reverend Daryl Gray, who is a leader in the Prop D for Democracy campaign in St. Louis, and John Updike, of course, the president of Open Primaries. They're going to take you on a coast-to-coast guided tour of the primary reform movement, so buckle up and get ready. And with that, and without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to John and Daryl for the presentation this afternoon. Take it away.
Thanks, Mindy. Thank you so much. I'm John Updike. Before I introduce Reverend Gray, who I'm really honored and pleased to have him co-hosting this event today. He's someone I want all of you to get to know. Just a quick tour of what we're going to do today. Mindy referenced this. We have 14 different 2-minute presentations set up over the next 40 minutes. We're going to take you from Alaska to Florida to Pennsylvania. We're going to talk about new legal tactics being developed. We're going to talk about research that's come out in the last 12 months on the importance of primary reform. We're looking at state-based efforts, municipal efforts, a whole gamut of activities. We're going to run through that, and then we're going to open it up for your questions. When we get to that point, the way to ask a question is type your name, your state, and a summary of your question in the chat section. I will then call on you, take yourself off mute, ask your question of whoever you want. I'm not going to ask you a question for you, but it's helpful to me and to Reverend Gray to see what question you want to ask in advance in case there's multiple people that want to ask the same question. So let's get going. We're going to start this whirlwind tour around the country. I want to start it off by introducing all of you to my co-host, Reverend Daryl Gray. Reverend Gray has been a civil rights activist for over 40 years. Today, he's the secretary of the Missouri Democratic Party. He serves as the chair of the Progressive Caucus of the Missouri Democratic Party. He's also a former Kansas state senator. He's the political advisor to the St. Louis Metro Clergy Coalition. As Mindy mentioned, he was an early endorser of the Proposition D for Democracy campaign for open primaries and approval voting in St. Louis. And he's been an outspoken advocate for the Black community, exploring new approaches to achieving political power and quality representation. So Daryl, welcome. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you very much, John, and to Mindy and Russell. I'm honored. When I was approached with this, John, like a lot of people, I was a bit hesitant because, you know, I grew up in a two-party system. You know, you're either a Republican or you're a Democrat or you're nothing. And the thing that we found out that there were a lot of people in between that needed to know that that their votes mattered, that their votes counted. And, you know, this was an opportunity to really make a difference and change things for the better. For all people who want to participate in the political process. And so I'm excited about this. I'm encouraged about what's been happening across the country. And I just can't wait to get started. John said that this is going to be, he said down and dirty. So I'm not sure what that means. I guess, Mindy, that means that everyone will get a chance to have their say and we won't try to control it, but we'll manage it as best we can. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great. All right, we're going to start off today with a report on new research having to do with primary reform. Doing that is my good friend, Dr. Omar Ali. Omar is the Dean of the Lloyd International Honors College at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. He's also an award-winning historian of the global African diaspora. He's the author of a great book called In the Balance of Power: Independent Black Politics and Third-Party Movements in the United States, which was published over a decade ago and is being re-released this fall. Omar's going to give us a quick synopsis of new research on the topic of primary reform. Welcome, Omar.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, John. Thank you, Reverend Gray. And good to see all your smiling faces out there. I'm going to quickly go through 4 different studies. I'll begin with case of Baltimore. George Washington University political scientist Christopher Warshaw asks a very important series of questions, but capsulated as how can we increase electoral competition, raise participation, and improve political representation. And he examines the efficacy of a number of potential reforms that could improve the functioning of Baltimore's mayoral elections and potentially other municipal elections. And he does this by analyzing national trends and looking over the academic literature to evaluate 3 potential avenues of reform. One is nonpartisan elections, secondly, ranked choice voting, and thirdly, top 2 primaries. Again, he does this to see what it could mean for voter outreach, voter participation, and representation. And his report recommends very clearly that Baltimore move to a top 2 primary system in which all candidates run in a single primary election and the top 2 vote getters would advance to the general election. And the report recommends that the state legislation be pursued to enable the city to put election reform to the voters themselves. Next, in California, Dr. Charles Munger of the Schwarzenegger Institute of the University of Southern California concludes that the top 2 primary in California was a successful reform. It introduced greater competition in elections, resulted in greater interest in elections, and provided the opportunity for no party preference and other voters to say, to have a better say. And this led to general election winners who had previously not advanced past the old partisan primary system. And so the top 2 primary system creates an opportunity for more voters to participate and vote for any candidate, including no party preference. Let me just quickly go to Christian Gross's work appearing in the Journal of Political Institutions and Political Economy. The top 2 primary, which is used in just under 1/5 of all US House elections, has reduced ideological extremity among legislators relative to those elected in closed primary systems. And this system has essentially created 4 new possibilities. Finally, just the political scientist Stephen Sparks, writing in the Journal of Political Communications, writes that top 2 primaries reshape the electoral process by changing the mix of opponents that candidates face, thus altering the electorate to which they must respond to. So specifically, when top 2 primaries produce 2 same party opponents for the general election, candidates cannot simply rely on party-based voting to win, which means that they have to do greater outreach. So those are just some very quick synopses on some of the latest research that's come out within the last 6 months, actually. Thanks, John.
Omar, thank you. Omar, I've got a question here, particularly within my community, and now voter suppression is a big issue. Is there any research that explores the relationship between closed primaries and voter suppression?
There's a couple of studies that are out. I think that what I would need to do is get back to folks about that, because a lot of the stuff is anecdotal, but there's a lot of, I think that there's growing interest in this, and now in some ways risen to the surface where political scientists and even you have some sociological studies coming out that are beginning to look at this. So I don't have a definitive study right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Omar.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Omar. That's great. And we're going to be sending an email out to everybody with all the links to the research so people can, you don't have to copy it down from the chat where Russell is sending it out.
Great.
All right. Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Omar. We're now going to move to Alaska. It's my pleasure to introduce all of you to Scott Kendall. He's a leader in the Alaskans for Better Elections campaign. He's an attorney. He's the former chief of staff to Governor Bill Walker, and a really knowledgeable guy who knows a lot about Alaska politics. So Scott, tell us what's going on in Alaska.
Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you, Omar, for the setup. I think this is great. And as John indicated, I've got experience with kind of nonpartisan, less partisan leadership, working for independent Governor Bill Walker, and many years working for Senator Murkowski as well. What we're doing up here in Alaska is ballot measure 2. It's a 3-part election reform that sort of starts with the open primary. So it's open primaries, open nonpartisan primaries with the top 4 finishers, moving on to the general election. The general election will be run by ranked choice voting. And then the last part of our reform is more strenuous and more timely disclosures of dark money. As a small population state that still has, 2 senators, and important resource issues, we see a flood of money into our state, and every election we simply can't pull apart who donated and why. Things are going great up here. Our polling for the reforms has been uniformly great. We've received a lot of support from the reform community around the country. We're combining reforms, so we hear from the ranked choice people, the open primaries folks, but it's been phenomenal. We're working with Mindy Finn, who you heard from earlier. She's doing the data for our project because, of course, neither party would work for us. But it's a reform that's really at the heart of where Alaska is at. 64% of Alaskans do not affiliate with either party. So we're completely, we have a semi-closed primary system, but we're not represented by the outcomes in that system at all. And just 2 weeks ago, we had primary elections where 9 very popular Republicans were challenged. 6 of them lost. And the primary common denominator, the reason they lost is they either worked in a bipartisan majority, or they had, basically they had the guts to smile at a Democrat once in a while and work across the aisle. The party targeted them for elimination, and by and large, they were removed. But unpacking those primary results, only 5 to 10% of their constituents voted against them. And yet in these non-competitive districts, these longtime, very popular incumbents were taken out, kind of removing choices for the rest of Alaskans. So now we have some fairly conservative folks who are now replaced by people wildly more conservative. And then at the other end of the spectrum, they largely face a Democratic candidate. So once again, Alaskans aren't represented by this current system.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, that's sort of the mandate and where we're at in the race, but it's looking great.
And you said 6 of 9 candidates who were seen as kind of effective legislators lost their primary because they ran in a closed primary. Did I hear you right?
That's correct. And some of these were not even, we had legislators who I've seen numbers that showed 65, 70% of their constituents liked them, and they lost by margins 60-40, 70-30. So these races weren't even particularly close because of the very, very partisan nature of who showed up and voted in them. And again, a lot of the moderate voters moved over to the Democratic ticket, so, the moderates are sort of split, very, very low turnout. And then again, 5 to 9% wow. is all that voted against them, and yet now they're out.
So Scott, just a quick follow-up question. I know a lot of eyes in the reform community are on Alaska this year because it's the first time this new innovative model of combining open primaries, top 4 open primaries, where the 4 top candidates go to the general election, combining that with ranked choice voting and dark money disclosure. Very innovative new way to combine these reforms. Do you guys feel pressure that there's kind of like a lot of people nationally looking at that? Or how is this being a first of its kind effort impacting on what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I suppose there's pressure. I mean, we are, as Alaskans, we're used to being unique. Governor Walker, when I worked for him, was the only independent governor. I worked for Senator Murkowski's write-in campaign, kind of the second of its kind in the entire nation's history. So we're used to doing things a little differently. But I think the pressure we feel as a campaign is, Alaska's got challenges just like every state does. We've got challenges from coronavirus. We've got challenges on our state budget. And a lot of us feel the pressure of we have to elect grown-ups so they can work together and solve some of these issues. We've had a 6-year fiscal crisis with no end in sight, and a ferry system and education system that's suffering.
Great. Thanks, Scott. I'm sure people are going to have questions for you in the Q&A section.
Thanks, John.
All right, we're now going to go someplace warmer. We're going to Florida. We have actually a number of short presentations on Florida where there's a very exciting ballot measure underway. Let me turn it over to Steve Van Coor from the All Voters Vote campaign. Steve, take it away.
Thanks, John. Florida is tougher than usual than most places to get something like this on the ballot. We had to gather 1.1 million signatures from Floridians to agree to put this on the ballot. Then we have to go through a very hostile Supreme Court. And after we get through all that, we've got to get 60% on the ballot. But finally, and more importantly, we don't have election day in Florida. We now have election month. And election month starts in 2 weeks. Where vote by mail ballots, about 60% of the electorate will be voting start voting in about 2 weeks. So it's an extended play. As of right now, we're on the ballot with a top 2 all voters vote initiative. And really as of this week, I'd say the armies are engaged. The League of Women Voters, which had spent 2 years studying the issue and voted in an open forum to support expanding the right of people to vote in primaries, has reversed its position in a closed door meeting, and apparently 2 board members resigned over it, and press is looking into that. Leaders of the Black Caucus have now come out against us, said that expanding the right of 1 million Black and Hispanic voters to vote is somehow voter suppression. And now we're getting feedback that the parties are now re-voting like they did before to oppose us. They're starting to send out emails and social media. We've got a plan in place. We're trying to fund it, but we're reasonably confident our polling is holding at about 60%, and battle's engaged, and we're fighting it every day. I've been spending 6 hours a day on the phone with reporters because it's a big state with 10 separate media markets. So we've been fully engaged in that regard.
Wow. All right. Thanks, Steve. Let me turn it over to Steve Huff from Florida Open Primaries. Steve, tell us what you've been up to.
Well, John, thanks. This is exciting to be here today with all these reforms across the country. I've been involved in Florida with the Top 2 issue for 8 years. In 2017, I became director of Florida Fair and Open Primaries. And as you know, we've formed a new PAC recently, Florida Open Primaries, to support Amendment 3 for the Top 2 open primaries just recently. And you know, I won't speak, you know, long on the issue because it's a lot of things that Steve Van Coor just alluded to are breaking loose right now. But I understand that we have, you know, a video to show. We're proud that the new PAC raised about $50,000. We produced a very nice video that we're all proud of, and we've gotten tens of thousands of views as we put it all across social media on various platforms. So if you want to go ahead and have that.
I'm an independent voter. Soy independiente.
I'm a Democrat.
I'm a Republican.
We don't see eye to eye on everything.
But here's something that just makes sense. When we have elections, every registered voter should have the right to vote.
There are 3.5 million voters in Florida like me who don't belong to a political party, and we can't vote in the primaries. 90% of races are decided in the primaries. And my tax dollars pay for them, but independents can't vote. That's just not fair.
Plus, the current system is not just bad for her, but it limits choices for Democrats like me.
And Republicans like me. I want to vote for the best candidate in the primaries, even if they're not from my party.
That's why we're voting yes on Amendment 3 this November. Amendment 3 lets all voters vote in an open primary. It's simple, it's fair, and should be the law.
So when it comes to improving Florida, the time has come to let all voters vote. Vote yes on Amendment 3.
Let all voters vote. Vote yes on Amendment 3.
Let all voters vote. Vote yes on Amendment 3. Dejar que todos los votantes voten.
That's great, Steve. That's
Yeah.
that's a really wonderful message.
Yeah,
And,
it's great.
and
Thank you, John.
I heard that the latest count there's 157,000 views on the video statewide.
Excellent.
So congrats. All right, we got two more Florida reports, and then we're going to move on. We have our dynamic duo of Dario Cruz Rodriguez and Elena Ashburn, who are high school students who recently formed Students for Open Primaries. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elena, and I'm one half of Students for Open Primaries. And I'm going to talk to you about what we've been up to. Before I hand it over to my co-director, Daryl, I'm just going to talk about a few quick things. We are both Floridian high schoolers, as we've mentioned. I'm in the Southern Florida area, and Daryl is in the Central Florida area. I've been working on promoting Amendment 3 on various websites and platforms with a special focus on social media and getting it out to other students, both in high school and in college. We have been creating graphics and video series and working with other voting forward initiatives to get the word out about Amendment 3. And we've also been working with a documentarian on getting our stories about Amendment 3 out, as well as the story about open primaries. So that's really cool. I'm going to pass it over to Daryl to finish up the recap.
Part of our work, we're also working with other organizations like Represent Us, who is also a member of this association, on helping us get started with phone banking and a fairly unique method of getting the word out, which is social media organizing. It has done a lot more of a presence in the past few months. We're also starting to talk with local reporters in our state to get the word out about Amendment 3 to voters, especially in a time where disinformation is large and vast, especially picking up during election season. So yeah, that's Students for Open Primaries for you.
Oh, we also have an op-ed out in the Miami Herald about how having open primaries will help with getting the younger generations their voices heard in the primaries, because 50% of the millennial population identifies non-party affiliates or independents, and a third of Gen Z, our generation, they don't and identify with a party either. So it's really important, especially as these younger generations are starting to vote. We need to have open primaries so everyone can vote.
Yeah, it was published in the Sunday Miami Herald, by the way, not just the online version. It was in the actual print paper. So congratulations, the two of you. That's really great. Finally, to wrap up Florida, Dr. Jessie Fields, who's a longtime activist, a board member at Open Primaries, she wrote a piece for the Sun Sentinel, and I want her to give her the opportunity to talk about it. Go ahead, Jessie.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, Reverend Gray, and Steve Encore, and Steve Huff. Thank you, and Elena and Dario. Thanks for your reports. I wanted to briefly focus on three areas in my report about the organizing against Amendment 3 in Florida, what I think we should learn from it, and what should be done, in my view. So yesterday, as Steve Encore said, the Florida Black Legislative Caucus held a press conference against Amendment 3, at which Representative Shaw, an African-American Democrat from Tampa, said, "There's a risk in us trying to solve what turns out," and I'm quoting him, "there's a risk in us trying to solve what turns out to be a short-term problem with regards to independents voting in primaries. But by solving that short-term problem, we would be tinkering with the mechanisms of politics here in Florida and have lots of unforeseen consequences," unquote. So surely the exclusion of over 1 million independents of color from voting in primaries in Florida is not a short-term problem. So I ask all of us to really appreciate the enormous potential and opportunity for political growth and empowerment of communities of color that Amendment 3 offers. In a large swing state like Florida, with a large Black population and large diverse communities of color, the level of inclusion of nonpartisan primary reform, which Amendment 3 is, that level of inclusion is deeply threatening to the Democratic Party and to the Republican Party, to their control over elections. So let's face it, the parties live off of division. Amendment 3 enfranchises Black independents, Latinx independents, and independents of color, other independents of color. It allows all voters to participate equally and choose among all the candidates. It breaks down a lot of divisions. So what should be done? In my view, the campaign for Amendment 3 has to reach out to communities of color about letting them know and letting them express themselves in all their diversity, letting them know that Amendment 3 is an opportunity for everyone, including independents of color, the community itself, to speak for itself and not to be taken for granted by the Democratic Party in particular. Young people of color have to be reached about Amendment 3 along with the communities in general. We have to connect to these communities to really be about change and to really be about giving people a voice. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse.
Hi, Miss Fields, Reverend Gray.
Hi, Reverend.
I've been following the attacks in Florida, claiming that African Americans would be disempowered by open primaries. And as a former state senator from Kansas, of all places, a Black state senator from Kansas of all places, I know that when politicians, regardless of their color, have to be more accountable, they do better jobs. And I heard what you said about reaching out. Have we been able to identify anyone within our group that would have the, the credibility to speak to those who are really getting that false information from Black legislators? Have we been able to do that?
Well, I think it's interesting, especially given the elected officials saying, well, we have to take care of this problem of the exclusion of independents from the primaries, because when there was an opportunity for them to do something about that issue at the state Democratic convention in Florida in October, there was an effort and on the agenda to pass opening the Democratic Party opening its primaries. And there were, in terms of leaders there, Aaron McKinney, who's a leading Black Democrat in the Miami-Dade County Democratic Party, and who supported the party opening up its primaries to independents and wrote a wonderful piece that was published, an editorial. The party defeated that. It was not supported. Many local counties supported it, and we could send you that information. So there are party leaders, and particularly young people, and many people are leaving the parties in Florida. It seems like the parties would want to open up to attract new voters. So there are leaders there, particularly young leaders who want to see the party, the opening up, and would support, I think, Amendment 3. So yes, I think the answer to that is yes, and others from Florida could also speak to that.
John, I can speak to that.
Go ahead, Vancouver.
The leader of the group is actually a personal friend of mine, a guy named Bobby DuBose, and I reached out to him the night before, asked him to read the data, reread the report he was basing it on, and because of political and peer pressure, just wouldn't even respond to me. And this is somebody that we've been in deep personal fights on the same side of over the years, and it was, frankly, a little hurtful, but they chose to rally around Sean Shaw in this false report, which we now know is being paid for by certain special interests who do not want the current system to change.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. We could talk about this for an hour, but we have to keep on our journey. So now we're going to head out to Oregon and hear from Tom Messenger, the founder of Oregon Open Primaries. Tom.
Hi there, everyone. Yeah, we got started this year it's actually the third time. Oregon had an open primary issue on the ballot in 2008 and 2014. And I'm sorry, but there were lies shared by both political parties about what would happen if it passed. And we have a lot better information now. Oregon has been a leader in, election reform since 1904, when we put out the initiative referendum and recall. And again, we did motor voter several years ago, which, by the way, generated a lot more independent registrations. We did vote by mail a long time ago, probably the first state in the country. So came together this year, and we're going forward. Our objective is to have an initiative on the ballot in 2022, but we started early so we could develop our plan, develop our documentation, one of the things we have done, because it's been here before, is we have developed what we call arguments and responses, because there have been a lot of false arguments put out about why open primaries and top 2 is wrong or bad. And we have counter arguments for those. And that's one thing we're using. We have jumped into the social media area. We have Facebook accounts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts, and we are feeding those using Hootsuite with either 2 or 3 articles or stories every week. And that's been good. We are now have over 150 followers on Facebook, maybe it's 145 followers on Facebook, and moving forward there. Just getting ready, getting prepped to go live and go after it in 2022. That's my quick 1 minute.
That's great. Tom, just a quick follow-up question. You mentioned a relationship between the motor voter bill and the increase of support. I didn't quite understand that. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, okay. So what Oregon did is they passed a law that said when you get your driver's license, and you can get it online, you will also automatically be registered to vote unless you don't want to, okay? And like 99% say sure they want to be registered to vote. And you get the choice to choose a political party. And the way it's coming out in the last 4 years, about 85% of the people who register choose no political party.
85%.
And
wow.
85%. Well, that's a stunner. And so what we have here, Oregon is 4 million people. We now have almost 1 million, well, what we call NAVs, non-affiliated voters. They're not with any party at all. And we have another 6%, which is 150,000 who are with minor parties. And so you're talking well over 1 million, almost 1.1 million voters who can't vote in the partisan primaries. And that's, as stated earlier, that's wrong. We need to get all those people to be able to vote in the primaries.
Great. Thanks, Tom. That's very helpful. Okay, we're going now to St. Louis. I'm pleased to introduce 2 leaders with the Prop D for Democracy campaign. First is Assemblyman Rasheen Aldridge. He represents St. Louis's 78th district in the Missouri Assembly, where he is the youngest member of the Missouri Assembly. He served on the Ferguson Commission and has been a political activist since he was a teenager. Joining Representative Aldridge is Mallory Rush, who is the campaign manager of the Prop D for Democracy campaign. Welcome, both of you. Tell us what's going on in St. Louis.
Thanks so much, John. So yeah, we're thrilled to be here with you and thrilled to report out on our very exciting campaign in St. Louis. So for those who are hearing about it for the first time, Prop D does 3 things. So it creates an open primary, as St. Louis is still one of those 20% of cities in the country that are using partisan primaries for our municipal elections. It implements approval voting, which means that during that primary, voters will be able to vote for all of the candidates that they approve of, rather than having to choose just one, which we think is really going to cut down on vote splitting in our very crowded primary races between similar candidates. And then it puts in a top 2 runoff general election. So right now, the general election for our municipal elections is essentially meaningless. In our last general municipal election in April of 2019, we had only a 10% turnout citywide. So we are feeling very urgent about making sure that our upcoming elections, both the primary and the general election, are really meaningful, with our next mayoral election coming up in the spring of 2021. So we've had great news, great momentum recently. There is an amazing article that came out in the Riverfront Times, one of our local papers today, that compares our current election system to the sundial. It says technically it works, but why would you want to use it anymore? We've had some amazing endorsers. Obviously, you've seen Rev Gray and Representative Aldridge on this call. We have the League of Women Voters in our corner, the Young Democrats, our treasurer, Tashara Jones, our recorder of deeds, Michael Butler, another wonderful state rep, Steve Butts, who've all been incredibly strong advocates. We're polling really well, about 72% approval out of the gate. and have an amazing team of volunteers who are about to get out for our first canvass this weekend. So we're very optimistic about our work here over the next 8 weeks.
That's great. Thank you, Mallory. Representative Aldridge, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, Mallory's such it's hard to follow up behind great women like Mallory and so many others. I mean, she really took everything. Only thing I would say, is really important, especially here in the city of St. Louis. I'm so glad to see my expectus brother, Rev Gray, and also Uncle. It's important for us here because, in our last two big major races for mayor and also President Board of Aldermen, what you've seen was, the vote was split in the primary. And the winner of the primary did not come out with majority of the votes. And the President Board of Aldermen, it was split 36, 32, 34. And then in the mayor race, it was even a little lower than that. So like Mallory said, what we're seeing here is after people win in the primary, they're going into the general election just as, it's a Democratic city, they're going to win regardless. And that's not what's helping voter turnout in the city. If anything, it's only hurting it more. So I think this is really good. I'm happy that it's on the ballot. It forces elected officials like myself to not just stop and do the work in the primary, but whoever comes out of the top two of the runoff, continue to engage voters, continue to educate them about the platform so that voters can make an informed decision on who they, want to be their next mayor or their next alderperson or next president board of aldermen. So I'm really excited to see this thing pass this November.
Great. Just one quick follow-up question, particularly for you, Representative Aldridge. So you're both an elected official, but you've also been an activist, very involved in leading efforts on various issues, expanding the minimum wage, social justice. How do you think about is there a connection, as you see it, between what Mallory's saying, that the existing election system is like the sundial, it's 100 years out of date, and being able to advance these kind of life or death issues? I mean, St. Louis is kind of ground zero in the country for addressing police brutality and social justice and income inequality and poverty. How do you think about or talk about that relationship?
So I'm always going to be an activist before a public servant, not really tend to call even a politician. But I think, especially in the city of St. Louis, not too far, Ferguson and St. Louis County, which this would only be to the city of St. Louis, but everything in St. Louis is so close. You can drive to Ferguson and be there in about 15 minutes. It's so much going on for us, like you say, these really important issues, police brutality, making sure we got fair housing justice, making sure that we have healthcare facilities in our community, and making sure that we have a leader that's actually going to do that. Right now, with big money that is still in play, especially in our city, it's hard to really push sometimes leaders to be really firm on an answer, and not just to give a political answer or rhetoric, but actually say, this is what I plan to do. Because the way that our political structure is set up, I know some of the pushback is saying Black leaders have been against this. I think if anything in the city of St. Louis, it helps us, because sometimes we have a lot of Black leaders that feel like they should run, but what we've seen is Black leaders splitting the vote. And what that will end up helping is allowing those vote splitters to, go into the runoff. But we haven't had a system in place where we really can hold elected officials accountable. If we don't get them in the primary and be able to ask these tough questions without vote splitting, without big money involved, without sometimes endorsements from certain parts of the city, it makes it really hard. So I think Prop D is going to hold more people feet to the fire to actually be pushed more on these issues that are continuing to hold St. Louis back. And they're still holding us back with the current leadership we got due to the current voting system that we have.
And I must say, like I was saying in Alaska, where a lot of eyes nationally are on it because it's combining ranked choice voting with open primaries, a lot of eyes are on St. Louis for combining approval voting and open primaries. It's a very kind of innovative combination, and a lot of people are looking at what's happening in St. Louis. So thank you both. This is really great. Okay, we're now going to the Keystone State, Pennsylvania. Jen Bullock, who is a talented therapist, the founder of Independent Pennsylvanians, and a leader in the Open Primaries Pennsylvania Coalition. Tell us what's happening in Pennsylvania.
This is my therapy. Wow, so inspiring. Like I want to have Pennsylvania students for open primaries. That's my new commitment. It was so really inspiring to hear the Florida report and everyone's report. So yes, we're excited. We're a founding member of a relatively new coalition started in 2018, the Pennsylvania Open Primaries Coalition, which includes Common Cause PA, Committee of 70, Philly Set Go, which is young professionals, League of Women Voters, and other groups concerned with infusing needed democracy in our state. So the mission of the coalition is to, open our primaries from being completely closed so that we can actually have competitive elections and actually have representation of the electorate and actually improve voter participation. And as we know, it's also the fair and just path, given that all taxpayers in Pennsylvania pay for the primaries, yet we are barred. The coalition is in the majority. We knew this anecdotally, but there was a recent Franklin and Marshall poll that the results showed over 2/3 of Pennsylvania voters strongly support open primaries. They also very much strongly support ranked choice voting. So it's really good to see that just came out. We have been supporting a bill, Senate Bill 300, sponsored by a very powerful Republican who was sick and tired of the primaries being very narrow and having really locking out a diverse voice of politicians. And the bill, which would open up the primaries to unaffiliated voters, passed overwhelmingly in the state Senate. 42-8.
Wow.
That was really, really exciting for us to see. People really, everyone, there were people that even publicly say that they didn't support open primaries who voted yes for that bill. It is now in the House, it's stalling in the House, political game playing. We all know how that looks is going on, but we are so excited and invigorated with this coalition and with the overwhelming passage of the bill on the Senate side that we're moving forward to keep on building momentum for democracy in our state.
Thanks, Jen.
Oh, and here's our new logo. I'm really excited. People over parties that our group created.
That's great. All right, we're now going to head. Oh, you have a question? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just a quick question, Jen. I know historically we've had to rely on courts to resolve our political issues. I know Pennsylvania had to deal with the court system with unfair gerrymandering. Is there an option to get the courts to intervene with regards to voter inclusion, or are we talking about two separate things?
Oh, great question. Actually, it's not separate. Our team, Independent Pennsylvanians, has been talking about this for years. Do we need to have a court strategy and move to court? We haven't yet. We've decided, we keep on deciding no, and I don't know that there's any court momentum, court case momentum currently for open primaries. We joined forces with a court case in New Jersey a few years ago that was a DOA. But yeah, it's a great question, and we keep internally wondering is that a way to go? And we keep looking at ways to unify independents and Democrats and Republicans on the ground, because these reforms, as we know, would benefit everyone. So that's been our primary focus.
Right.
I'm sorry, John. I just wanted to ask just a quick follow-up. Would the motivation or the lack of motivation to do it be is it financial? It's a financial motivation?
That's yes, partly yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
It's all finance.
All finance.
No romance without finance. All right. Now let's head to Wisconsin. We're I'm very pleased to welcome a former alderwoman from Madison, the Madison City Council, and now the executive director of Democracy Found, a Wisconsin-based reform organization founded by Catherine Gell. Please welcome Sarah Eskridge. Sarah, what are you doing in Wisconsin?
Thanks, John. Hi from Wisconsin. Our organization, Democracy Found, was founded by Catherine Gale and Austin Ramirez, who is on the call today.
Sorry, Austin, didn't mean to.
No worries, but just thanks to all my Wisconsin folks for being on today. Be real short because I know we want to get to Q&A. So we in Wisconsin have been very quietly building a cross-partisan legislative campaign for Final Five voting, which is the combination of an open top 5 primary with ranked choice voting in the general election for congressional elections. So our strategy has been really focused on building a grass tops coalition of really business and community leader support to influence our legislature to get this bill through. We recently launched our lobbying phase in a much more starting to be public phase of our work in Wisconsin. So I want to share one quick success story with you as we move into the introduction of legislation next session. We're already poised to introduce our bill with bipartisan co-sponsors. We have 5 co-sponsors secured, the majority of whom are Republicans, and they are the party in control in our state legislature, so that's important, but we have bipartisan support. And our lobbying meetings have been going really well. I think much to the kind of upset conventional wisdom, legislators have really been open to these conversations and this work. So the worst quote unquote reaction we've gotten from a legislator who, right, they always come in skeptical when you're talking to them about this sort of work. But the worst takeaway quote I got was, and I quote, "You don't suck as much as I thought." So for now, I'm going to take that as a win in Wisconsin with that legislator, if that's the worst reaction I've gotten so far to our lobbying meetings. So that's a quick update on what we're doing in Wisconsin, one very small piece, and I'm happy to talk to you more about our purple state strategy and our legislative successes to date in the Q&A or offline after this meeting. Thanks for having me, John.
Thank you, Sarah. This is great.
Hi, Sarah. It's Reverend Greg again. Quick question. I mean, we're from Mike Brown in Ferguson, as Rasheen mentioned, and George Floyd in Minneapolis, Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Jacob Blake in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has become ground zero for presidential politics and Black Lives Matter. Is that impacting your strategy or you're moving forward at all?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Reverend Gray. You're right, Wisconsin is ground zero for everything, it feels like right now. And in many ways, it's almost, you all know, having been in this movement for reform for a very long time, there's a little bit of a catch-22 in that the worse things get, the more interest there is in truly systemic and transformative change. So I've seen with our work at Democracy Found that the more frustrated people are with the current system's inability to deliver results on anything they care about, regardless of the issue, the more they're willing to be innovative and think about how a redesigned electoral system could really deliver different results and accountability. So that's a very quick answer to your important question, but I do believe that the dynamics on the ground in Wisconsin are driving more interest in our work at Democracy Found right now.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping to be able to get up there. John is going to send me to Wisconsin sometime soon, so maybe I'll get a chance to talk to some of your Black political leaders up there.
I'd love to have you. Love to host you here.
That'd be great. Thanks. All right, we have a couple more presentations, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. Thank you, everyone, for being so engaged and patient. We're going out to New Mexico. Former state representative, 3-term representative, and U.S. diplomat Bob Pearls. He's also the founder of New Mexico Open Elections, one of the most tenacious reformers I've ever worked with. Bob, tell us what you're doing in New Mexico.
Well, that's a kind introduction, John. First off, I'm in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, having just camped. I'm at a strip mall. Hopefully there's not too much ambient noise, so my apologies.
You sound great. You sound great.
Thank you. You know, every open primaries bill of any sort ever introduced in New Mexico was crafted by our group, my group, New Mexico Open Elections. And surprisingly, out of the blue, during a special session a couple of months ago, my state senator, without telling me or any group in New Mexico, made an amendment to an obscure bill that for the first time in New Mexico allows independents to vote, but they have to change party registration to a major party the day of the election. New Mexico is one of 9 states that's a closed primary system. We have no ballot initiative or citizen referendum. We've successfully, with the help of some key legislators, moved a semi-open primaries bill through several committees in the House and the Senate, though we've never gotten it to a House floor or Senate floor vote. Now, that's kind of the background. Everybody wants to undo it. We're hoping and we believe we can fix it, allowing for DTS or decline to state voters in New Mexico, otherwise known as independent voters, to choose a partisan primary of their doing. And in the midst of that, we're debating with many legislators whether just to skip the semi-open primaries approach, allowing independents to vote in a partisan primary and go right to ranked choice voting. But let me just wrap up by saying that I've never seen more polarized politics in New Mexico. We're having a very difficult time getting any Republicans to sign on. It's becoming a Democrat bill, and yet key Democratic leaders are trying to kill it because of the usual partisan arguments.
Well, good luck, Bob. I know you've been at it for many, many years. And I think just an observation, I think part of why they passed that phony bill is because you've been, you know, kicking their ass for so long. They felt like they needed to do something. So even if it's a bad bill, you should take credit for that. All right. I've asked leaders from North Dakota and Arkansas to join us. Stephanie Matthews, the campaign manager for Open Primaries Arkansas, and Trip Weld, campaign manager for North Dakota Voters First. Last week, both these campaigns, which were innovative combinations of top 4 open primaries, ranked choice voting, and other political reforms, were thrown off the ballot by highly politicized legislatures and courts. And I've asked them to come on to give us a very brief synopsis of what happened in North Dakota and in Arkansas. Stephanie, why don't we start with you in Arkansas?
Sure. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. So yeah, like John said, we were kicked off the ballot a little over a week ago, basically over a technicality in the language that was used when we certified that our canvassers had obtained background checks. So Arkansas law requires that canvassers obtain federal background checks through the Arkansas State Police, which is not actually doable. You cannot do that through the Arkansas State Police. But regardless, our certification language said that our canvassers obtained federal background checks, did not say that they passed federal background checks. And that language is what the Arkansas Supreme Court used to justify kicking us off the ballot.
Wow.
Yeah,
so
and the redistricting effort that was also in the works as well was kicked off. We had the same canvassers. So both efforts are now off the ballot. We've filed a suit in federal circuit court as sort of a Hail Mary legal challenge to this, and we'll see what happens.
Got it. Trip, tell us what happened in North Dakota.
Hey, John, and thanks. You know, just try and make it quick. Measure 3 was open primaries, ranked choice, and redistricting. Our story actually probably started 2 years ago in 2018 when a lot of our partners banded together to initiate an ethics commission in North Dakota. This was in 2018. There was a marquee Senate race in North Dakota in 18 with Heidi Heitkamp on the ballot. And so 2018, I think the state Republican establishment in North Dakota, for all intents and purposes, is really a one-party state in a lot of ways. The state establishment effectively kind of got caught, and the Ethics Commission passed. And what effectively happened is after 2018, they said, not again. 2 weeks ago, we were thrown off the ballot. The reasoning that was used in our example was not obscure background checks, but was something similarly obscure, which was the court held that a ruling from 100 years ago, which has been ignored by every single successive constitutional measure since, basically said that we did not include 5 paragraphs needed of legalese as to the affected elections, even though none of, again, the previous measures, I think of which there's been almost 20, passed since 1924.
Wow.
And so that was the reasoning. And just to give a few other details, the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit was North Dakota's kind of original Republican super PAC. The super PAC contracted with a firm named Odney Advertising, which is really kind of the main lobbying and public affairs firm for the Republican Party in North Dakota. The lawsuit included an amicus brief that was signed on by 94 of the 118 Republican legislators across the state. During the process, this is before we submitted our signatures, the Secretary of State, who is supposedly the independent arbiter, was caught saying that he was trying to find anything to, quote, nail Measure 3. And then what was kind of understood to be the last non-political body in North Dakota, which was the Supreme Court, voted unanimously against us on that technicality that I mentioned. And then as a final quick note, as just kind of the forces here, there is also a legislative initiated measure on the ballot this November called Measure 2. Measure 2 would subject all future citizen-initiated ballot measures to an approval vote of the state legislature. If the state legislature disapproves, it would go back on the ballot for another round of approval from the voters. And so when I say this story started in 2018, it's important context. We passed an ethics commission, and the end result was every single lever of power being marshaled against Measure 3 in 2020, in addition to a whole new ballot measure initiated by the legislature that would effectively kneecap citizen-initiated measures in North Dakota on a go-forward basis. So that's what we had, unfortunately. And Stephanie, thanks for going first. I was hoping I wouldn't have to be first, so thanks.
Thank you for presenting. I'm sure it must be somewhat devastating to work so hard and then get thrown off the ballot that way. I think, though, part of why I wanted you guys to be here today was it just seems very important to me that all of us in this movement understand that this is a controversial and hard issue, and the political establishment looks for any opportunity to kick us off the ballot. And that's going to be, in some ways, Tripp, what you're describing, that's going to get more, it's going to get more and more difficult to put things before the voters. All right, last report, my colleague Jeremy Gruber, then we're going to open it up for your questions. Jeremy's going to talk about some work we've been doing on defense in states that have open primaries where the political players have been attacking it, trying to enact closed primaries. Jeremy, bring us home.
Okay, thanks, John. Lots going on in terms of defense. As some of you may know, much of the South has nonpartisan voter registration. In fact, 20 states around the country have nonpartisan voter registration. That means that you don't register with a party when you register to vote. You just register as a voter. Imagine that. By virtue of nonpartisan voter registration, party primaries in much of the South are open to every voter, Republican, Democrat, and Independent. And in the last couple of years, the Republican Party in particular has identified nonpartisan voter registration open primaries as targets for suppression tactics. So the Missouri Republican Party adopted closing the primaries as part of its official platform. The South Carolina Republican Party ran a ballot question in the last primary, sneakily asking, should voters have the right to join a party? And we believe this is a run-up to doing exactly what happened in Missouri. In both Missouri and Tennessee, both states have introduced legislation for the past 2 sessions and held hearings trying to close the primaries. They failed. We mounted campaigns in both states, a particularly strong push in Missouri, and have been able to keep them off out of winning in the state legislature. But we think they're going to be back. And it's really no coincidence that this is happening in the South. And it's happening right after the pre-clearance rollback of the Voting Rights Act, because a lot of the Republican legislators in the South are starting to see open primaries as an impediment to the suppression of the Black vote. which they're doing in so many other contexts. And now they're starting to see closing the primaries as part of that effort. So we're monitoring the situation. We're ready. We expect them to be back. And in the meantime, we're parlaying the work we've done in Missouri in particular into offense by taking the organizing we've built, putting it in support of Measure 3, which Mallory spoke about earlier, the STL Approves initiative in St. Louis, and also in defending the Clean Missouri Act, which some of you may be familiar with, which the voters passed to end gerrymandering, and now the Republican-led legislature's trying to repeal on the November ballot. So we're taking our defense and turning it to offense in both those instances. Then we're also playing offense in one other key way, litigation. Jen Bullock mentioned this a little bit in her talk about Pennsylvania. The reform movement has been noticeably weak on using litigation to push for change, especially compared to other movements from environmental to civil rights. We're trying to change that. We've developed a litigation plan to go after closed primaries from two angles. First, many states have what's called an anti-donation clause in their state constitution. That says you can't use public money for private purposes. We're putting together a state claim alleging closed primaries do just that by directing public taxpayer funds to private party elections. And with the incredible explosion of independent voters, that's becoming increasingly against the public interest. We're taking that challenge in state court and we're coupling it with a federal claim that we're developing, a First Amendment claim under the US Constitution alleging that closed primaries are a form of forced association under the First Amendment. Because of course, in many states, in order to vote, the state is forcing voters to affiliate with a party that they don't agree with in order to vote. We think that that forced association violates the First Amendment of the US Constitution. And so we're developing both those tracks in a litigation arena to go on the offense on litigation. That work is still in its infancy. We're still doing some of the research and development, but look for 2021 as we start to develop that further and roll it out. Some exciting new things to come out next year.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
All right. That was our national tour. As you can see, our movement is growing. It's diverse. We have great leadership, a lot of interesting activities. And now let's throw it up for your questions. First question is from Kirk Douglas, has a question about Alaska. But just to remind everybody, if you have a question, go to the chat, type your name, your state, and a one-sentence description of your question, and then I'll call on you, unmute yourself, and ask your question. So first question is to you, Kirk. Go ahead. Kirk, you there?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
There you go. You're here.
Okay. I get into a lot of discussions about this type of thing with people around the Kansas City area. Is there an article or a document somewhere that analyzes both ranked choice and top two and discusses the pros and cons in a way that is reasonable and can be used by somebody like myself in discussions?
Yeah, Kirk, this is Scott Kendall in Alaska. One of the documents we went with, which is, it's not as much a comparative between open primaries and top four and ranked choice voting, but it's by Catherine Gale and Michael Porter. It's a Harvard Business School study they did, about a 40-page document, and about a third of it is dedicated to this idea of the open primaries, but with enough variety in the open primaries to feed into a ranked choice system as sort of the superior system, because it keeps the maximum number of people and the maximum number of ideas engaged into the general election. That's where I started. I think that would be a good document for you.
Okay, the other question I had was why top two as opposed to top four? I would think that would, top two would be restrictive, top four would open it up to perhaps less well-known candidates.
Yeah, so in Alaska, we've done top four, and we've done it because of Alaska's very particular political landscape, where 64% of Alaskans don't affiliate with either party. We've had a third party candidate be governor. He was an Alaska Independence Party candidate. We've had a write-in for our U.S. Senator statewide who ran against both the Republican and, even though she was a Republican, Senator Murkowski, she ran against both the Republican and Democratic parties. And we've had an independent governor most recently prior to the current governor. So our thought was a top two would be artificially restrictive in Alaska. You might have threads of political thought that don't make it onto the general election ballot and people drop away, they disengage. We also saw the danger being in many, many districts across the state, you have two Democrats or two Republicans, and then there's no diversity of thought happening in that campaign. They're just sort of trying to, set up their camp just a shade in the middle because they know their base is secured. And what we said is all the way through, we want all voters and all ideas at the table. And then if there's, a candidate with a particular niche idea, maybe he or she doesn't have a chance to win, but their idea doesn't get lost in the shuffle and they can bring that to that top four election because, of course, those other candidates want to be the second choice of that candidate's supporters. So that's why we say top four versus top two. And I think that report I sent you to discusses it as well. I mean, every state's different, but I can say for Alaska, top two.
Thank you.
Vancouver, do you want to talk about the decision in Florida to go with top two?
Yeah, we followed your lead, John. Well, in Florida, we have a very difficult triad we got to get through. We got to get through something that will pass 60% of the electorate. So we polled a wide variety of issues, and only the top two open primary looked like it was going to poll above 60%. Also, it's the only form of open primaries that has made it to and through the U.S. Supreme Court. Others haven't, and that's really critical for us because if you follow Florida politics, even after you pass something through this gauntlet, you're immediately challenged. We have 4 or 5 amendments where people spent 10, 15, 20 million dollars, got it through, and then we're immediately challenged. So we have a very hostile mid-level district court of appeals system that tends to just throw things out and support the parties in power. So we went with the most, pardon the expression, the most conservative of the legal frameworks.
Just to add to that too, I know in Florida, in Alaska, you're able to put together various issues into one ballot referendum. So it's open primaries, ranked choice voting, and dark money disclosure. In Florida, you can't do that. So if you went with top four in Florida, you'd end up with top four, but then you wouldn't have ranked choice voting in the general election. So you'd end up with some of the same problems. So I think the way I think about that question is that every state is very different. There's different cultures, there's different dynamics, there's different laws, and we as a movement have to be very sensitive to one size does not fit all. There needs to be a lot of experimentation and a lot of local knowledge brought to the table. I think that's so important. Okay, we have a question from Lou Hinman in New York about manipulation in open primaries. Go ahead, Lou. Lou, you still there? Lou, you got to take yourself off mute.
Yes. Okay. Now can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yes. I have heard people say, especially recently, that who oppose open primaries because they think it subjects the election to greater manipulation. I think typically the argument is somebody who is, quote unquote, really a Democrat will vote for the Republican candidate they think will make the poorest showing in the general election. Now, I can think of a number of responses to that, but I'd just be curious to know what some of you all think about that.
Well, in terms of Florida and Amendment 3, you could not make that argument if you have a nonpartisan top two system because everybody votes together. It's in closed primaries. If you have an open partisan primary, a Democratic primary, Republican primary where independents are choosing, or people can choose which one to vote in. If you have a totally open system, everybody votes together and the top two or whatever, the top four, whatever, go on to the general election. So you know, that's one, I think that's a strong argument in that case. And then, you know, one can also come down to the principle that people have a right to vote for who they want to vote for.
Yes, right.
Can I answer that too?
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
You know,
You guys
it's
take
funny
it away.
that you brought up the gamesmanship, and I see some of that in the columns. Florida is notorious for political gamesmanship under the current system. And I'll give you two quick examples. We have Florida actually has open primaries when only two candidates of the same primary register, or only from the same party register. And we have what's called the write-in loophole, where we find somebody many times who doesn't even live in the district to just put their name on out there as a write-in candidate, and that immediately closes the primary. It is a common practice, and it's gotten to the point where candidates don't even pretend it's not their friend who's on the ballot. But also today in the Orlando Sentinel, we have 21 Senate seats on the ballot right now. Only 3 are competitive.
Wow.
And in all 3 of those, there's an NPA candidate on the ballot. And the Orlando Sentinel just busted a story about how all of those are being funded by a select few groups to push Republican funding groups that are putting these NPAs on the ballot as a way to peel away votes from the Democrats. So we are home to political gamesmanship under the current system.
Thank you.
One other quick thought, just to add to what the other folks were saying. You know, they looked at in states that have partisan primaries that are open. There's studies that have looked at this issue, and they found that it just doesn't happen. And in fact, it doesn't happen even in very, very big elections. Just recently, some of you may remember a lot of the right-wing political pundits were calling for Operation Chaos in the South Carolina primary, asking that voters jump into the Republicans jump into the Democratic primary as sort of faux independents to make mischief. Guess what? The number of crossover voters did not change from any previous election. It just doesn't happen. People don't waste their votes that way. People see their votes as important. They matter, and it just doesn't happen.
Thank you.
All right, we have one more question, and then we're going to bring it home. We've kind of touched on this a little bit, but this is from Doug Tooley in Colorado, a question about kind of legal strategies. Go ahead, Doug.
Some of the last speakers, I think, addressed this very well. You know, those that situation in North Dakota and Arkansas, that's very discouraging. And I'm just wondering if we can use those types of legal attacks, a legal response to that as a way of generating publicity for the movement.
Right.
And, you know, just thinking about it a little bit, you know, I hear that argument about disenfranchisement, you know, that the partisan approach is a way of disenfranchising everyone, not just Black voters. And I think another way of looking at it is maybe, you know, qualified immunity. Why do we have qualified immunity for politicians, you know, that are associated with the courts? I don't know if anyone can take that any further, that type of strategy further, is a publicity approach, or the publicity aspect of legal challenges.
Any thoughts, team?
I mean, I've, you know, 40 years in civil rights, I agree with you. I think that when you're under attack the way that you have been in Arkansas and North Dakota, you have to continue to shine the light on what's happening. Dr. King taught us that it's important always to get public support. The only way you're going to get public support is to continue with public information, public education. So I agree with you. If you've got a monster, well, I use that word, like the courts, who obviously are moving based upon political pressure, I think that you have to let people know that that's what you're up against. You've got to expose the Goliaths among you. And I know I use a lot of church phrases. So I do agree with you. I think that right now, keep the light on them, keep the pressure on them, keep the community informed. I think that's how you continue with the support. Because at the end, we're coming back. We're not going anywhere.
Any final words, anyone? All right. Thank you so much for staying with us on this, this epic tour of the country. Everyone today will be receiving a follow-up email with links to the organizations and research pieces and articles and editorials. I really want to encourage people, we've got 54 days until the election, to really think and double down on how you can help Alaska, how you can help what's happening in Wisconsin, how you can help Amendment 3 in Florida, Prop D in St. Louis, the legislative efforts in New Mexico and St. Louis, and keep the movement growing in Arkansas and North Dakota, as Reverend Gray said. We're not going away. This next kind of 2 months is just a real opportunity to touch and educate and involve hundreds of thousands of Americans on questions of democracy and inclusion. So expect an email from us in the next 48 hours. Stay connected, and we'll be in touch about everything that we're doing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Take care.
Thank you.